Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, preparing to check in on a couple of my worm bins. They're red wigglers, last fed 12 days ago, and I've got some information about them here on this board. There's a little bit of over a month of age difference. The one over here, the older one, is from late December, and the one over here is from early February. So a little bit over a month difference in their ages. And the older one is now 228 days, fed 19 times so far, getting feeding number 22 today, and the younger one, 193 days, getting feeding number 17 today. And over here in the younger bin, the younger bin? No, the older bin. Over here in the older bin, we might stumble on it. A little novelty item that's been circulating in a number of my bins for a number of years now is an old cork. And it definitely doesn't look the way it did when it was new. When we do bump into it, sometimes we could see a little bit of what seems to be wear on it showing. And what do we have here? So when I feed, I usually like to mark where I last fed. Not that finding where I fed would be so difficult because I typically just feed down the middle. But I like to use these coffee filters to indicate where I last fed. And like I said, it wouldn't be hard because I typically just feed down the middle. I could see some springtails crawling around on this one, the one that was over here in the younger of the two bins. It was during our last check-in 12 days ago that we restored the paper covering to one of them. I can't remember which bin was thought to be a little bit damp, so we were allowing it to air out. And if I'm not mistaken, it might have been, I don't know, maybe the younger one was thought to be a little bit more damp. So we were allowing it to dry a little bit, and we finally realized during the last check-in that things did look good and that it seemed realistic to come back on with the covers to prevent any further drying from occurring. And I definitely see a lot of springtails down within the material too. Springtails don't usually faze me, but there is one system of mine in which I do have kind of an outbreak situation going on, although I'm almost starting to get the sense that over here in these two bins, because I see a good number of them here as well, I'm almost getting that feeling like perhaps the springtail situation in these two bins has already exceeded what's going on in the mixed red worm bin, where we had, months and months of springtail fun going on, where things seem to have finally subsided, but I guess maybe the springtails have decided to move into these two systems instead. And a lot of people will just tell you, hey, what's the big deal? Leave them be, they're fine, they're helping out, they're shredders, they'll just assist with the breakdown process, they're not bothering your worms, what are you worried about? And all those statements are absolutely true, so I'm not disagreeing with anyone that, challenges what I'm saying in those ways. Perhaps I'm just not expressing myself clearly when I, try to explain how I'm not against the springtails. I just prefer to see them in fewer numbers and not so evident, when you start combing through the material in your worm bins. So what we've got here are the husks of a couple of mango seeds. And for a while, like in this one here, the actual seed inside the husk is still holding up pretty good. I believe it was in the other one then that we were starting to see that it was really breaking down considerably. Here's the stem of a banana. We were actually using the mango seeds to help us find remains of the pieces of cotton that had been composted in these systems over numerous months. And it was during the check-in of these bins 2 times ago. I believe there was a 12-day interval between the last 2 check-ins too, so it would have been 24 days ago now, 2 check-ins ago, that we decided to bring an end to the composting of the towels that I had going on in these. They weren't very big, maybe pieces about this big of towel. And the only thing that remained was just one single thread from each chunk of towel. Right along the edge, I believe, is the piece of thread that was kind of holding together the edge, the very edge of the towel. And we just decided it was time to pull those remains out. That's kind of interesting. Is that a single worm kind of tunneling through the cork? Is that possible? If it is possible, then that's kind of cool, because it does look to me almost like one end of the worm is over here and the other end of it is obviously hanging out the other side. Is this the, like if I disturb the worm on this end, it looks like he's trying to come out the other side to get away from me. That's pretty amazing. That, I don't know if like there's just natural tunnels through cork, or if the worms have actually tunneled and created that hole. I don't know. It's interesting. So I guess besides the mango seeds and the cork, there's also this stem of a pumpkin. Usually when I'm running buddy bins like these, paired up and running and being managed together, sometimes I expect to find similar things, such as the mango seed in both systems, but the cork is unique to the older system. And I also wonder if the pumpkin stem might also be unique to the older system. It also seems to me like the older system has more worms, and if I remember correctly, the worm count on these, I did glance at it on my tracking spreadsheet before I came down here. I believe that the starting worm count here in the older bin, when we first launched the bin 228 days ago, was thought to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,600 or 1,700 worms, whereas the estimated population that we started the younger bin with, I believe we only had something like 950 or so worms that we launched off the younger bin with. And you would think that after that much time has passed, you know, the younger bin would have had time to get caught up and reproduction to have occurred, and that the population would have expanded to the point where maybe the systems would just be both reaching their physical carrying capacity based on the available space in each system. But maybe that just wasn't quite enough time yet, because it does seem to me like we still have a larger worm population living over in the older system. So I've got some newspaper here. You can see little chunks of it are missing, and there's big tears in it and stuff like that. So I figured I would just use this stuff down in the feeding area as supplemental bedding. I don't know if we need to go any further than that as far as bedding goes. Although, you know, when it comes to applying bedding to your worm bins, you can almost never go wrong by being really generous with this stuff. But it does seem to me like this should be adequate. Before we pile in the new foods, we're going to just return some of these things we stumbled on along the way. So there's the mango seed, and then these things were leftovers from the last feeding. These are little chunks of the skin of some cantaloupe rind. They've already stripped it clean of all the soft, flavorful stuff, and they'll work it all down eventually, but this stuff's, I guess, a little bit tougher than just the actual melon. And then back down into the older bin go these somewhat unique items that are specific to this bin only, the pumpkin stem and the cork. What happened to our little friend? Didn't like being out here in the bright light, so must have left. Alright, so the foods that I have for them, it's a variety of different things that my mom contributed yesterday. She stopped by and I was kind of taken aback by the amount of stuff she handed me. It was so heavy. I couldn't believe how much it was. And it was, I guess the main reason it was so heavy was because there was a great deal of watermelon rind. None of that is actually appearing here in this feeding today. That stuff is still out in my freezer. I just figured I'd grab some of the oddball type of stuff. So I've got some lettuce here, iceberg lettuce that really looks like it was left a little bit too long in the refrigerator, perhaps forgotten about, because it's all brown and nasty. And then there's a little assortment of other random things in here, little chunks of radishes and stuff. And then I've got my pocket knife here, because this chunk of whatever this is felt really firm in terms of being frozen into like a block, and I didn't know what to expect from it, but oh, okay. Fortunately, the knife is cutting through it like butter. It felt so hard, like I wouldn't be able to chip it apart into pieces, so I thought I might have to hack away at it, like at an ice cube or something, but luckily it broke apart quite readily, and I don't even really know what this stuff is, you know? Okay. It definitely smells familiar. You know what this might be? This might be the leaves of radish, because it kind of has that smell to it. When you buy radishes, it usually comes in a bunch, rubber banded together with, you know, perhaps a dozen radishes in a bunch, depending on how generous your vendor is. They give you the leaves with certain types of vegetables, such as radishes and carrots and other things, because those are actually edible too. So, you know, if the leaves that the plant grows with are not something that humans would normally consume, I don't think that they would sell it with the main item. But when they do sell it with the main item, so the leaves are basically included, it's because certain dishes are actually prepared with the leaves. And since it's becoming worm food, obviously it's not one of the types of dishes that my mom prepares. I think it, I don't know, I was curious into the topic once when I learned that not long ago, so I did a little research, and I think the specific example that I looked into a little bit used carrots as the example, and I think the carrot leaves are described as being used to prepare pesto, something that I don't eat, so I don't even know what pesto tastes like or anything like that, but I believe that that's just an example of one of the types of foods that are prepared with those leaves that a lot of people just toss, but some people actually hang on to and prepare food with. So, you know, since it was only a couple check-ins ago, or actually the last check-in, that we actually restored the paper coverings to these things to not allow further drying, I'm assuming that we're going to be okay from a moisture perspective and everything else in the outskirts of the systems. But I always kind of feel safer just taking a quick peek out there to see how things are doing. And I guess especially in systems like this where I see a lot of springtail activity, I'm curious as to whether or not that's present out there on the outer edges too. And it does seem like springtails are pretty much everywhere within the system. I'm kind of glad to see that in that other system I made reference to earlier, the other system where it did seem like there's a lot of springtails, that their numbers do seem to be diminishing a little bit. So that's kind of a relief over in my mixed red worm bin. I guess maybe the springtails have decided to come hang out with the red wigglers in these two systems now. Yeah, it does seem to me, just from tilling up these outer edges of these bins, that this bin might actually still be a little bit more heavily populated than the other one, just based on what I'm seeing here, because every handful seems to have lots and lots of worms in it, as opposed to what we're seeing in the other bin, where we're definitely seeing worms there too, in almost every handful, but seemingly not in the quantities as we're seeing over in the older bin. Sometimes the one that is still a little bit behind from the worm count perspective does manage to catch up, but perhaps there just hasn't been enough time for that to happen here. Yeah, it's getting there. We got a good number of worms hanging out here too. Alright, so I think that kind of brings us to the end of this check-in. Nothing too out of the ordinary going on here ever since we ended the composting of cotton fabric test. The only oddity in here is the cork in one of the bins. Otherwise, pretty run-of-the-mill systems if you ask me. So let's get them covered up and finish up here. So I think I did sort of swap these. I believe this one with the greater number of springtails might have been over in that other bin. Doesn't really matter. These are buddy bins, so to a certain degree I don't mind swapping components and interchanging things and not having to pay too much attention to putting back things exactly the way I found them. Because it's not an exact science after all, right? It's just for fun. Alright everyone, that's it for our check-in. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.